Okay, here we are, a new series that we're beginning today entitled Stress Busters. The lesson that we're going to be doing now is entitled An Introduction to the Problem of Stress. And before I begin the class, I want to give a shout out for this little book here that I used for this series. It's actually a book that belongs to an entire series of books used for small groups, and really I can recommend it. It's called Stressed Out, Keeping It Together When Life is Falling Apart. I checked online to make sure that it was still available, and it and all the other books in this series seem to be available on Amazon. So if you want more information, or if you'd like to get some great resource books for a small group discussion, I can highly recommend this particular book. All right, so let's get on to our lesson, our topic, if you wish, for the next couple of lessons, the problem of stress. Before we begin discussing the subject of stress, I want you to understand the perspective that I'm taking with this particular problem. As a minister, I'm often asked, why do Christians or people of faith in God, people who believe in Jesus, why do they experience stress? And why do Christians burn out? I mean, after all, they're Christians, they have faith, they're going to heaven. You know, why should they burn out? After all, shouldn't their faith be a guardian against this type of problem? And so my approach to this topic is to discuss the problem of stress and how it affects the person of faith, the believer, the Christian. And for this reason, I'll be looking at passages and teachings from the Bible that will guide us in our study on this particular topic. But having said this, I also say that stress affects believers and non-believers alike, and the solutions are similar, whether you are a faithful, church-going Christian, or you're a person that has very little interest in religion. Both individuals experience stress, and the solutions are very similar for both people. I believe, first of all, that everyone can benefit from these sessions, regardless of their level of faith, because everyone is subject to stress in one way or another. Which brings me to my first point when it comes to understanding stress. There's this idea that says that stress is associated exclusively with the modern times, with the modern lifestyle. The businessman or the businesswoman who is busy with their workload, they're extremely active, they're very stressed out. And people perhaps who live in the country, or those who operate small shops or boutiques, well, they're relaxed, there's no worry, there's no stress in their life. And a good example of how unrealistic this is comes actually from my own family. I remember as a kid, my uncle Morris owned a bike shop. They rented bikes and they also repaired bicycles. And I remember as a kid going in there, always fascinated by all the bikes in his shop and watching him in the back. And he owned the building, where the shop was, and he lived upstairs as a complete apartment upstairs. And he'd go up, for lunch and have lunch and sometimes take a nap, lock the shop up, and then after about 2 o'clock in the afternoon, he'd go back downstairs and do some work. I thought, what an ideal life. There must be no stress involved with that kind of life. And as I grew up, I began to realize that my Uncle Morris had 5 kids to feed. And he explained to me how sometimes the repairs that he undertook on these bikes took longer and cost more money than he had quoted at the beginning. He talked about angry customers who didn't get their bikes on time, or people who would actually steal merchandise in the store while he was in the back repairing the bike. And he would tell me that it was a very stressful life. And here I was as a kid thinking that, well, if you wanted just a life with no stress, a relaxed life, all you had to do was open a bike store. Well, my uncle explained that the truth was quite opposite from what I thought. Another idea is the naivety of people in the city who think, for example, that farmers, they have no stress. They live close to the earth. You drive by in the country, it's so peaceful, so beautiful, the rolling hills, the farmhouse, the barns, the cattle, leisurely strolling. We think that I ought to give up my stressful life in the city and move and do some farming. Well, those people who think that have probably never experienced the hail killing a farmer's crops, or a cow stepping on your foot. That happened to me once, it was very painful. Or perhaps their tractor breaking down just at the time of harvest, or perhaps the bank stopping their line of credit in the middle of the year when farmers need the money the most. And so behind this serene facade of cows grazing and corn growing, there's stress, lots of stress in being a farmer. And so it goes for everyone who is alive. Moms who are stressed out at home, college students who are stressed out at school, who have exams and all kinds of things going on at college, the elderly coping with the stress of aging, the young who have to deal with the stress of coming into adulthood, men and women feeling the pressure to succeed, to provide, to maintain, to survive, young people who want to meet someone, seeking a life partner. All of these things in ordinary life causes stress. And so truth number one for all of us is that everybody, regardless of age or sex or social position, experiences stress in one way or another. And so let's get some facts about the idea of stress. First of all, stress is not a bad thing. I'm talking about stress as if it were a bad thing, but it really isn't. I'm just saying that everyone experiences stress in one way or another. But stress all by itself is not a bad thing. It's natural. It's merely the body's chemical and psychological response to stimulus, enabling the body to deal with a various situation in life. It's very natural to kind of get pumped up for the game. Well, that's a kind of controlled stress. Or the stress in anticipation or preparation for company, for example, or for visitors. Stress is needed to have mental alertness when you have exams or complex work, when you need to focus. It's the body's stress that kind of elevates your attention when you need it to do certain tasks. A certain mindset that focuses our energy to get the job done despite obstacles. So we need stress, because stress is something that serves the body when it is challenged. So we've been designed by God to function under stress, even function more efficiently when stress is created by the situation at hand. Now, stress is a kind of a catchword for all of those things that come together in us mentally and physically and spiritually in order to kind of turn up the level of awareness and efficiency and energy in dealing with the various concerns in our everyday lives. Now, the problem occurs when this level is turned up too high for too long. Then stress turns into chronic stress and burnout, which is harmful to the individuals. Some symptoms of overstress which leads to burnout. Things like fatigue and exhaustion, insomnia, various physical pains like stomach upsets and headaches, muscle aches, chest pains, high palpitations, high blood pressure. And even there are some emotional and spiritual symptoms of overstress, being irritable, anxiety, depression, excessive anger, a feeling of isolation or cynicism or bitterness. Based on some material samples, it is estimated that $50 to $70 billion a year are lost in businesses due to stress-related illnesses. And overstress is one of the major contributors to heart disease and cancer and lung ailments and accidental injuries and cirrhosis of the liver, suicide, also Parkinson's disease. Medical profession tells us that 2/3 of office visits to doctors are prompted by stress-related symptoms. And so the key, of course, is not to eliminate stress altogether, because as I've said before, stress has a very important function in our life. The key is to reduce the intensity and the frequency of overstress. If you have a soundboard, when you have a soundboard, you have these little dials, right? And in these little dials, you have meters, and you have yellow and green and red. And red means that the sound is too loud, too sharp. And the sound engineer usually is handling the soundboard to make sure that those needles don't go or stay in the red, to turn things down. Well, it's a little bit like that. We have overstress that leads to burnout when those needles are always in the overstress position. Sometimes we need some overstress to get us going and to focus the mind, but when those needles are in the overstress position for too long, it becomes debilitating. So stress, it doesn't happen all by itself. It's a response or it's a reaction to what is happening to us. It's a preparatory stimulus to enable us to act and to think. People, however, who are overstressed for no reason at all are folks who suffer from something called anxiety disorder, or a more common title or term is panic attacks. Now, panic attacks have all the symptoms of stress overload, a heart beating faster, various physical and emotional symptoms of overstress and burnout, but there is no correlated reason for the symptoms. You understand what I'm saying? In other words, you have all the symptoms of burnout, but you don't have any of the reasons for burnout. Most people will work too hard for too long. They may suffer business ruin and family problems and begin to show signs of burnout from overstress brought on by the things that are actually happening in their life. And that is a legitimate thing. In other words, too much overstress for too long will lead to a burnout of some kind. However, another person may be going along just fine without any particular problems or overstress situation, and then suddenly will feel all of the same symptoms of burnout and feel these even more acutely, to the point where they will be incapacitated by the symptoms for a time. This is called a panic attack. It's anxiety disorder. It's not the same as burnout. And I think a lot of us know people even in our families that suffer from anxiety disorder. They have all the symptoms of burnout, they have all the symptoms of overstress, but their symptoms are not caused by overstress. A panic attack is caused by an imbalance in the chemical composition of the body. It has all of the same symptoms as burnout, but the reason for it is not your lifestyle, but rather the way that your body processes the chemicals within it. Some say the hypothalamus secretes too much adrenaline at any given time, and that's what provokes the panic attack. We don't know why that is, it just is. We don't know why it does that, but that seems to be what happens. Now, burnout, however, that happens when a person is stressed out for way too long or too intensely for too many things. Remember the needle I talked about in this little diagram here, the graph on the left? Your stress goes from low to medium to high. Sometimes you touch the red when there's a lot of things going on and then goes back down to medium when the crisis is over. That's normal. But in the diagram on the right, in that, that needle, that graph there, that arrow is always in the red. It never gets out of the red. A person is overstressed all the time for all things. Well, when that needle stays in that position for too long, then the next step or the result is what we commonly refer to as burnout. Now, burnout from overstress, however, requires several things in order to find rehabilitation. It's easy to say, well, just don't feel that way. You can't tell a person who's suffering from burnout, you can't tell them, well, I just have to relax. Well, it's not as easy as that. There's some things that an individual has to do in order to come back from burnout, in order to get that needle out of the red. So here are a couple of things for those who have gone beyond overstress and have gone into the burnout situation. Well, one thing we need in that situation is knowledge. A person has to understand what it is that they are doing and how it is affecting them emotionally and physically. They have to accept, hey, I'm in this burnout situation and there are things that I am doing that are causing this. Usually burnout victims repeat and reinforce their lifestyle as a means of dealing with their problems. For example, workaholics will work twice as hard to make the extra money they need to take a vacation so that they can relax. Their solution is, I'm burned out, I need to relax, so what am I going to do? Well, I'm just going to put in and work a lot of overtime and just work on Saturday and work on Sunday, for a couple of months to save up some money, and then I'll relax. It's easy to kind of smile at that solution, but a lot of times this is the answer that they come up with. They make it worse. Or people who are stressed out because they've suffered the loss of a loved one will isolate themselves in order to deal with the pain and stress. But this type of action usually makes matters worse instead of better. And it's almost a kind of, it's like a natural human tendency, especially in the loss of a loved one. We tend to pull back. A lot of people, they just want to go into a corner and hide. They don't want to see anybody, they don't want to talk with anybody. This is the way that they're going to handle the stress and the pain and the burnout that comes with this kind of blow to their lives. And it's exactly the opposite of what they actually need. What they need is to come out into the light. What they need is to come to be with other people, to receive some of the comfort and encouragement and strength that they can find in relationships and in interactions with other people. But many times they choose to do the exact opposite, which aggravates the condition that they have. So we need to understand ourselves. Step one, if you're in that position, burnout position, for whatever reason, we need to understand ourselves, and we need to understand and accept what it is that we're doing to ourselves that are causing this problem. Another thing, another kind of prescription for burnout there needs to be change. Understanding what we do that causes stress and burnout and how it affects us, this is important, but it's incomplete in the healing process unless we change. Unless we change, there's no healing. There's no pulling back from that red zone. Knowledge will help diagnose the problem, but it's change that is the medicine that will help the problem go away. Burnout is the result of our loading system, pushing it beyond its ability. We overload our system rather. We make it do things that it can't do. We go beyond what we're physically and emotionally capable of. And so many times it's due to a failure to recognize that God has placed some physical or financial or emotional limit on us, and we refuse to accept these limits. Each person has a different limit, but when we surpass these, when we go past these limits, especially for an extended amount of time, eventually something's got to give, and usually what gives is us. Is our ability to cope, is our ability to be able to maintain a balanced emotional state. The change necessary is not a change to become something different, but rather returning to a more realistic version of what and who we are. We burn out many times because we try to go beyond the limits of who and what we are. And the answer is to accept what our limits are. Just simply accept and say, you know what, I'd like to go this far, and I want to go this far, and I think I need to go this far, but I recognize that I can only go this far. I only have this to give, and I can't give anymore, and I can't go any further than that without damaging myself. And then, aside from knowledge and change, faith is required. Faith is required. Insight into the problem and a change to live more within the confines of who we are helps those who merely live in and for this world that exists here with some level of satisfaction. However, for those who are disciples of Jesus and experience burnout, a faith adjustment is also required, since the road to burnout has usually been caused by or resulted in a damaged faith. Nobody who is a believer who has experienced burnout has done so without damaging their faith in one way or another. I want to read a passage of scripture here in Mark chapter 9, a story of a father who experienced this burnout that we're talking about. We pick it up in verse 14. It says, when they came back to the disciples, they saw a large crowd around them and some scribes arguing with them. Immediately, when the entire crowd saw him, meaning saw Jesus, they were amazed and began running up to greet him. And he asked them, what are you discussing with them? And one of the crowd answered him, Teacher, I brought you my son, possessed with a spirit which makes him mute. And whenever it seizes him, it slams him to the ground, and he foams at the mouth and grinds his teeth and stiffens out. I told your disciples to cast it out, and they could not do it. And he answered them and said, O unbelieving generation, how long shall I be with you? How long shall I put up with you? Bring him to me. And so they brought the boy to him. And when he saw him, immediately the spirit threw him into a convulsion, and falling to the ground, he began rolling around and foaming at the mouth. And he asked his father, how long has this been happening to him? And he said, from childhood. It has often thrown him both into the fire and into the water to destroy him. But if you can do anything, take pity on us and help us. And Jesus said to him, if you can, all things are possible to him who believes. Immediately the boy's father cried out and said, I do believe, help my unbelief. When Jesus saw that a crowd was rapidly gathering, He rebuked the unclean spirit, saying to it, "You deaf and mute spirit, I command you, come out of him and do not enter him again." After crying out and throwing him into terrible convulsions, it came out, and the boy became so much like a corpse that most of them said, "He is dead." But Jesus took him by the hand and raised him, and he got up. When he came into the house, His disciples began questioning Him privately. "Why could we not drive it out?" And He said to them, "This kind cannot come out by anything but prayer." So note here, the father is stressed to the max because of a lifetime of worry and anguish and fear over a son who is, it seems, hopelessly tormented by a demon. And I mean, if you looked at the story, it wasn't just that the demon possessed him. It says it would try to throw him into the fire or try to throw him into the water. The demon was trying to kill him. Now, it wasn't just possessing him and making him do odd things. It was trying to actually kill his child. And so the father, he cries out, he says, "I do believe, I do believe." But then he says, "Help my unbelief." Not only was the boy sick, but the father was burned out as well. And one of the signs was a faith that was beginning to sag. And he said it himself, I do believe, but boy, you've got to help me here because I'm having trouble with my faith. And so for the Christian, there's no healing without a renewal of faith. For the unbeliever, there's no total healing without a recognition that Jesus is one's Lord and Savior. Well, in the end, burnout is largely due to man's ongoing effort to save himself or to care for himself without reference to God. We all experience stress, and the key is to manage that stress and be aware of when we are overstressed. We need to kind of be thinking about those graphs, those meters. And when we begin to sense that we're starting to be in the red, this is the time to pull back. This is the time to do something about our condition. When we can pinpoint the times and the occasions for this overstress that we suffer, we are better equipped to lessen the intensity and the frequency of this situation. Remember, the key is not getting rid of all stress. The key is to lessen the frequency and the intensity of overstress. All right, well, in our next session, we're going to be focusing on particular types of stressors in our lives and how to be able to effectively deal with these. For example, we'll talk about stress from worry or stress from work or failure or stress from loss. And then finally a story of one Bible character who suffered from burnout and how God personally ministered to this man's burnout. For now, I'd like to leave you with a stress vulnerability scale so you can evaluate in a kind of a general way your own stress level. And that's part of the bonus material online that we have. Of course, there's the video that we're doing here, but you'll note that there's a study sheet that you can download and print out to work with. And there will also be, for this particular lesson, the stress vulnerability scale that you can also download and just follow the instructions, and it'll give you a score to kind of give you an idea of where you're at. In other words, those needles, where are you at? Medium, are you in the red zone? A bit of a reflection about your own stress character. All right, so that's it for our first session in the Stress Busters series. We'll come back with the next one soon, and we look forward to having you with us for that. Thank you, and God bless you.